Good day to everybody. Today I have with me Professor Sirimal Abeyratne. He needs no introduction, but nevertheless, for the record, uh, I want to introduce him. He's the Professor of Economics in the University of Colombo and also happens to be one of our governing council members of the Marv Institute. He's currently the chairman of the Monetary Policy Consultative Committee of the Central Bank, and he's much worse in economic affairs. So I'm going to ask him some questions about, firstly, Professor, how will regional trade uh, in, get affected by this current situation, or what the situation that will transpire even post-corona pandemic?
Yes, when we say regional trade, if we are looking at South Asia's regional trade, it's a very minor matter compared to global trade and compared to our global trade. Every country in the South Asia region actually, they are much more connected to the rest of the world than to their own neighbors. And our trade is about 5%. 5% of our total trade in the world. It is a very peculiar situation compared to many other regions, and regional trade is much bigger in many other regions than their global trade. For example, if you take the European Union, and more than half of their trade is within the region, not outside the region. So, if you look at the current COVID-19 crisis, we have to face three kinds of challenges. Number one, of course, the internal lockdown policies to arrest the spread of the COVID-19, and so that our economic affairs got affected, and we are down with production and consumption and international trade. And secondly, even though we recover with this, we have to face downturn in economic affairs in relation to international trade because of the problem in the rest of the world. So in that sense, actually, recovering our own economy is not sufficient, and because we need to engage in international trade with the rest of the world. So the recovery of the rest of the world is also equally important. Third factor which affects our trade now is going to be the economic recession in the world. And when we put all these things together, the domestic factors, international factors, and how they affect our economic affairs entirely, and this year there are going to be an economic recession. Recession means the volume of economic activities get contracted, so that there won't be our supply chains are disrupted, interrupted, and they are broken. And so that even though we produce certain things, and we may not be able to export and trade. Also, we need certain inputs to be imported, so that we may not be able to do those things because of the chaotic situation in the global economy. So the recession is the last thing, and which can affect our internal economic activity. So we have to face these three types of challenges because of the COVID-19.
So in your view, Professor, what are the sectors that will be most affected when you look at our growth sectors? What are the sectors do you think will be most affected?
As far as international trade is concerned, First, we look at the export sectors. And when we look at the export sectors, we know that our large part of our exports, uh, garments exports, tea exports, and other manufactured exports. And these are the sectors which would be affected most. And also, if you look at the global economy and the Europe and the USA, these two regions are very, very important as far as our export trade is concerned. So those are the two regions which are going to be affected severely by the COVID-19, so that it has a direct negative impact on our export trade, because our garments and tea also going to be hit by this issue. And then the Middle East, and Middle East affect, in addition to export trade, it also result in remittance problem. And though we don't have to touch upon that one, but there will be a reduction in remittance as well. But what is less affected by this would be, because Asia is recovering soon. Probably South Asia will be hit by the COVID-19, even though Sri Lanka is very much likely to escape it because of our timely, important way of handling the issue. However, if our trade with the Asian countries, and there is some hope, particularly the recovery of China. China is not going to stay there, because China has acted wisely and China has prepared even prior to the outbreak of the virus, and China had already established lay down the infrastructure that is required and to handle these situations, this kind of situations. And in fact, China is far ahead of Europe as well as the USA in this regard. So the trade gets affected by the problem because of the chaotic situation in Europe and the USA, but we have a hope to recover our trade in East Asia and with China. But at the moment, actually, we don't have much trade with China. So there are going to be a difference in the future as well. In addition to these things, and import trade, of course, we know that today our trade patterns are different, and different what it used to be about 25, 50 years ago. Because to produce anything, you need inputs as well, and those inputs are coming from abroad. And those supply chains get disrupted, and therefore we have to face situations like disruptions in import trade. In addition, we know that we have a domestic issue because of the foreign exchange shortage, and that shortage will also have a negative impact on our import trade. So that's how our trade is going to be affected. As far as the service trade is concerned, the biggest issue would be tourism. And tourism gets affected not because it is not a Sri Lankan problem alone. Again, it's a global problem, because there will be a substantial reduction in global travel industry, so that it's not going to be a lucrative industry in the near future. So this is how things are going to turn around during this year.
But do you see there would be an opportunity for, say, value-added agricultural products, for the country to look at agriculture more seriously, modernize agriculture, look at value additions, look at some sort of edible products that that we can export uh, to Far East, to China, to India, to SAARC countries. Do you see that as an opportunity, Professor?
There is an opportunity for agriculture sector, because actually agriculture sector, it will be the least affected sector by this issue, and industry and service sectors get affected much more than the agriculture sector. But however, and there are issues with respect to our agriculture. If we keep plantation agriculture aside, that is tea, rubber, and coconuts, basically, our other agriculture sector is largely small scale and not up to the global standard. So that even though there are opportunities in the global market, there are domestic issues which prevent us, which make it difficult for us to go into the global markets. In fact, because we haven't undertaken that much reforms in the domestic agriculture sector, so that production of vegetables, fruits, flowers, and rice and those things only in very marginal way that we can export to the other countries, and not like the way that they are exported by many other countries which practice the large scale production. So the scale of production is going to be an issue, and we need to find ways and means of overcoming this small scale production issue, particularly with respect to the domestic agriculture. But of course, it is important that agriculture sector being the least affected sector, and as far as our food security and domestic market is concerned, agriculture sector can survive to a great extent, but it may not be able to go beyond certain limits because there is no global competition for the domestic agriculture sector.
I'm going to ask you a kind of rather philosophical question. We look at economic growth. We always talk about GDP growth, economic growth. But after Corona, after COVID-19, let's say in a post-COVID-19 world, do you think there will be a paradigm shift in way countries look at growth? They look at sustainability instead?
Yes, there will be a difference because the world history has confirmed that the economies move, and the world economy, I mean, move along the cyclical path, which we call business cycle. So there will be expansionary periods and recession periods. Along with these moments, and there will also be shifting economic policies. And some people argue that it is the way that some people are considered to be neoclassicals, neoliberals, interventionists, monetarists, Keynesian, those kind of terms are attributed to some people. But I don't think it is there are people who fall into those categories. But if you really examine the application of different policies by different governments and during different times, they are really related to the movements of the business cycle. So it is rather than taking them as alternative policies, we need to consider them as the need of the time. However, even now, people might argue that this COVID-19 is a product of globalization, so that we should move away from globalization. We should focus on the domestic economy, and we should go back to our primitive, our own ancient way of prosperity, looking at more domestic agriculture and domestic market. Obviously, there will be time for those kind of policies, but eventually the countries will realize that it is not going to produce the kind of prosperity that they expect. In fact, if you are moving into that in that direction, it is It's an unwise move. Now look at how the Chinese economy is growing. China being a large country, being with a big market, huge market, 1.4 billion population, so that they have a big domestic market, even if they want to focus on the domestic market. But in spite of that, China will move ahead again in the globalization path. So that is how China knows that it is the way that China can maintain prosperity. China can become the global economic lead. Obviously, within the next few years, China is going to surpass even the United States. And within this problem is actually helping China to overcome this. And we already know that China has established the necessary digital technology and delivery technology, you can call it, and even to maintain certain level of physical distancing or social distancing, and to go ahead with different patterns of economic activities. And so they adopt different technologies, the available digital technologies, to enable the economies to move ahead. And in fact, only now Sri Lanka is considering about delivery technologies and to deliver the goods and services and lectures and these kind of conferences and teaching and learning activities. And only now we are considering to adopt these things. And so I think during the post-COVID-19 period, this social distancing should not lead to nationalist distancing, but there would be tendencies like that in many countries.
Yeah, now many countries have come up with a kind of economic stimulus to at least get over the situation, to reduce inequality in society. Our government came up with a social security fund. I see it as a positive move, but do you think we should sustain it? Do you think we should have it as long term, not just have it for, do you have it only for this particular period, but have it as a fund so that we could use it when there are disasters in the country?
Again, during recessions, countries adopt different kinds of policies. In fact, sometimes we used to say that in the recessions, we all become Keynesians. Why is that? Because we need to spend more and more, particularly the government. Government needs to spend more and more and to stimulate the economy, because the private sector is very weak and consumers are weak and the business sector is weak. So the demand falls. Therefore, the government has to be stronger in recessions, and so that's why they lead to Keynesian policies, which means actually government need to find more and more money. In fact, what they do is borrow and print. If they cannot borrow, they print, and they even buy their bonds, as we already have seen it since the global economic crisis. Governments have been expanding their spending, and part of that spending also goes to take care of the most affected and vulnerable groups. Most affected and vulnerable groups, even to provide them monthly part of their salaries. Now, European countries and the USA, they are providing, because people lost jobs, and the government is providing part of their salaries to keep them to sustain their consumption patterns and helping them to keep the nose above the water. So, which means actually the governments are expanding expenditure. But the problem is, if you look at countries like Sri Lanka, we see that governments have a very narrow fiscal space to do that. And the government cannot do this without borrowing further. So that's why we have seen Sri Lankan government is also very much uh, willing to have our debt moratoria and then negotiating with our countries, those who have lent to us, and then to borrow more, even more, and then to bring back again the taxes uh, that we have abolished sometimes back. So with all these things, and also to print more and more money, to spend more and more money, and we have seen the central bank is reducing interest rate and injecting money to the banking system and making the credits cheaper and widely available. So all these things lead to sustained aggregate demand, and at least to a certain extent to mitigate the negative impact of the problem. However, what happens is when the economies now move back to the expansionary path, government uh, cannot keep doing this forever. Governments have to withdraw and then create the room for the private sector to undertake more and more activities and to become the major players in the economy, so that there will be time for that as well. So we don't expect most of the things, handouts and other similar subsidies and bailout, these things to be there forever.
Professor, there's one more thing, actually, a couple of more questions I have. One is about uh, our workforce. Our workforce being, large percentage of it being coming from the informal sector, non-agriculture informal sector. I think they will be affected very much. So, what sort of advice can you give the um, uh, um, people coming from that um, sector for them to cope with the situation? You can speak
Yes,
in, yeah.
I think uh, this informal sector and non-agricultural informal sector, as you rightly said, is one of the most affected social groups in our society and in many other countries. Uh, the Actually, as individuals, if they are capable of looking at the new opportunities, new business opportunities coming out of these kind of difficulties, we should not forget that there are opportunities emerging in difficulties, and there are difficulties in the opportunities, as well as there are opportunities in difficulties. So there are new opportunities coming up. If you examine countries like China, we have seen many new opportunities emerge. In fact, they had that established that infrastructure to grab these kind of opportunities, but we haven't done that. So we look at these new opportunities. What are the new business lines that are emerging out of the crisis, and what are the new ways and means of doing businesses? Uh, uh, Doing businesses using digital technology, using your smartphone, and those kind of things. Uh, how to keep up the businesses in the coming years may not be possible right now, but in the due time, just like the government is trying to do that, just like the big businesses are trying to see that even for the small businesses have to follow these paths and then find new opportunities. There is another important thing that we should remember. As a nation, why Sri Lanka had to move into very, I think Sri Lanka is a very unique case as far as the way that we handle this crisis is concerned, because we, being a country adopted the toughest method to control this crisis. It has been successful, I think, and also it has been there for a longer period. Even we have gone to impose curfew. So, which means actually there are a couple of reasons for that. One thing is if we exceed our limits uh, without this kind of a strategy, in fact, it could have gone out of control because of our health sector capacities. Capacity is quite weak. The next problem is actually our ill-disciplined social distancing. We have to admit our weaknesses also. Ill-disciplined social distancing. And I should say that our informal sector should pay attention to this ill-disciplined social distancing, because in order to maintain a peaceful and healthy business environment, even for small fellows, even for small people, they need to pay more attention to uh, how to maintain meaningful social distancing, physical distancing, even in their business activities, even in their day-to-day social interactions. And because we know that, we know how people gather, how people uh, try to gather, and then without any of those social distancing, without 1 meter distance in the shop, and when they get into public transport, and when they try to get into the
But I
train.
heard, Professor, I heard in Western countries it's worse now. I
Yeah,
was
of
speaking to
course,
some people in
there
the
is
US
also panic buying,
yesterday.
and that's
They don't even wear
why
masks. Yeah, when they go out.
The Western countries have gone back to us right now.
Yeah.
And but we as a nation, I think we should be aware of this, the danger of this one, and then we should uh, avoid those things while we find the new ways and means of doing our businesses in the future.
Professor, one last question. What kind of structural changes do you think IMF or World Bank would want to, uh, I'll use this word very, carefully. Let's say impose on developing countries that are, who, who are kind of dependent on the IMF or the World Bank.
I'm not sure what kind of strategies they would bring out, but I would think that they will focus more on maintaining the fiscal discipline in the future, and also they will concern about our uh, debt burden, and also they might extend the debt moratoria to developing countries as well, expecting our way forward in line that they recommend, that they advise, so that they approve. In fact, what they want us to do is maintaining our fiscal discipline. That is the most important part, and I also think like that. But in addition, I think we need to have some structural changes in terms of establishing our, I think, the government. If you look at the business sector, though we say that business sector got affected by the crisis, if you look at the, there are, sorry, there are performing business sectors also now, because if you look at the internet service providers, telecommunications sector, these businesses have expanded, and people have realized that their role is much more important in the future than ever been in the past. So, which means actually they have a bigger role to play. I would say that even the government should move into this area, and encouraging or helping or assisting them to establish the fast internet facilities covering the entire island, and then establish helping the even for the small business sector to encourage them to move into those lines. And so that's one different kind of business environment that would emerge. It is already there in some other countries, East Asian countries. That business environment is already established there, and that's why they can sustain their economy running, because even though having a problem there, and that's why they can even come back to normalcy very quickly, because they can make use of this technology. Now, I think Sri Lanka is also, we haven't gone into this area that much, only we have initiated, so that e-commerce, things like that, and e-governance, these will be a major areas for expansion in the future.
So I think there will be also space for private-public partnerships, isn't that so? And
Correct.
I think, yeah, and the government will be compelled to look at those partnerships, and private sector also need to look at private-public partnerships not as kind of opportunities to get money from the public sector, but actually contribute in terms of bringing new technology, new being a kind of impetus to some of the public sector low performing organizations. I think, don't you think both parties, even the private sector as well as the public sector, may be compelled to think differently when they partner on certain endeavors?
Absolutely, they have much space to do things together.
So I have taken a lot of your time, Professor. Thank you so much for engaging with us. I hope you're getting on well, safe indoors. I hope you have enough stocks, and food is being delivered not only to your home but to homes around you. That's a bit of a concern, whether people are getting their essential goods on time at the correct price. So we'll talk about it on a later date. But thank you so much for connecting with us. Have a nice day.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and hopefully we will meet at Marga when the curfew is lifted out. And but still, I think we will continue to work online for some time, right? And we'll get used to that. Thank you once again, Professor.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you.